Let's go. What's up, y'all? What's going on? There we go. What's up, y'all? Can you hear me? Am I good? Yeah, I should be good. Yep. Volume should be good. All right, what's up? It's called a little day streaming. We do a little day streaming. So today we're covering Rudyard Kipling's The Man Who Would Be King. We're going to be looking at the text, of course, going back to the text. And we're going to be looking into this adventure story / Masonic allegory. Thank you, DJ. I'm glad to have DJ here, everybody here on this nice afternoon. So, yeah, we're going to be looking at the original text of this Rudyard Kipling late Victorian novella, as well as the film The Man Who Would Be King by John Huston. We'll also be discussing a couple of essays, essay analyses on this, on the film and the text, and I'll be using Piers Brendan's The Decline and Fall of the British Empire for some sort of, I guess, backing text when we're talking about the geopolitical grand chessboard ideals within the text. Also, of course, we're going to be talking, I'll be mentioning JD's analysis of this movie, especially the one that he did in Esoteric Hollywood, mentions The Man Who Would Be King. And if you don't have Esoteric Hollywood, y'all, you got to get it. So we'll be, shouts out to Jay's analysis. And JD and Jamie, of course, did an analysis of the Sean Connery films about 2 years ago, which I recommend. So, of course, we'll be using that to inform our analysis of the film. And what I'll say about this, oh, by the way, shouts out to, big shouts out to Presley, who sponsored this stream, who donated, gave a big fat chat to sponsor the stream, gave me a bunch of choices, and really great choices. And so I chose Rudyard Kipling's The Man Who Would Be King. And so shouts out to Presley. If you want to support me or you want to sponsor a stream, you want me to dedicate some time and energy, which is fun for me anyway, then you can send me a fat chat via PayPal, Cash App, Venmo. Also, you can hit the super chat button down there and send me a little message and I'll read it. And of course, please, please smash the like, share the stream, and hit the subscribe button. Really appreciate y'all for being here. So, yeah, let's talk about this. So, first of all, Rudyard Kipling's interesting because I would say it's funny that we haven't done Kipling yet, but because we've done, I think this is the 91st stream that we've done. So, but I think there's, everything we've done is kind of worked into our sort of prerequisite. We don't have a plan here, but everything is sort of served as a prerequisite for the next work, right? There's a lot of intertextuality in these works. And it's good that we're getting to Kipling because just this text is different from a lot of the other ones that we've done in that usually, as I've said a bunch of times, I like to draw a distinction between the writer and the speaker. But this one is slightly different because this novella, long short story that may seem oxymoronic, but it's a novella published in a series of short stories in the late 1800s. And this one's a little different because it's a framed narrative, because it's a story within a story. And the speaker is the first speaker, and the one sort of recounting the story to us is sort of a thinly veiled Rudyard Kipling himself. Now, that's not really integral to the plot, but I think it is important to keep in mind. And so just a little bit of background about Kipling. Most people know Rudyard Kipling. They know his work. Obviously, The Jungle Book is like fully ensconced in the culture, especially his children's works, right? Kim, Gunga Din, The Jungle Book. But he was an interesting character. He's still the youngest. I think he's still the youngest winner or recipient of the Nobel Prize for Literature. He won it in 1907. He won it in 1907. He was 41 years old. He was born in British India. And he's an interesting cat. His first cousin was Stanley Baldwin, the Prime Minister. And when you think of Victorian literature, people often think of people like, Alfred Lord Tennyson, the poet laureate, especially as far as verse goes. But Rudyard Kipling is really one of the guys that you think of. And that's because his poems, especially his poems, the White Man's Burden and If, right? If we discussed If recently as part of our Apocalypse Now stream, if you remember that, because Dennis Hopper, the photojournalist, quotes it as he sort of seamlessly goes between quoting T.S. Eliot and Rudyard Kipling, right? Did you know that if is the middle word in life? If you can keep your hands in all a bunch. And T.S. Eliot himself was a big fan of Kipling. He is mentioned as far as the literary allusions go in the sort of proto-postmodern landscape of literature within the 5 sections of The Wasteland. Kipling is mentioned, or at least alluded to. But this is an interesting story because it's clearly a Masonic allegory, maybe even a Masonic parable. And there's no attempt to hide that. That functions as part of the driving force of the narrative. That's how these two characters, Peachy and Sean Connery, Davitt, get to where they're going, and it plays a major role in the climax, especially in the climax of the short story, or the novella, rather. We could also allude to Joseph Conrad with Heart of Darkness, right, which we again also discussed as part of Apocalypse Now, and the two works are similar in a number of ways because they're going into different hearts of darkness within the outer bands of the colonial empire, the Victorian Empire, and that actually plays a role in the dialogue early on in the story. And it's really interesting because you can read it on a number of different levels. I mean, you could read this story as it's like a buddy adventure story, right? It's these two dudes, these two blokes who go off into Afghanistan, to this place called Kafiristan, and we're going to discuss what that means, especially in light of the narrative and of the geopolitical events of the time, especially going into the decline and fall of the British Empire. But it really is a Masonic allegory because of the quest element of what the two characters go through. And I'm always hesitant to say in literary works that, to point out any kind of a moral, like as if it's a fable. But if any work that we've discussed is a fable in a way, it would be this work. And I think that there's certainly a worldview espoused in this. Now, it's I guess up to interpretation whether you would say Kipling is doing a critique of this or whether he's just a propagandist for the empire, which he certainly was. But there are elements of critique within it. One analysis I read talked about the parody elements, and I'm not sure that's quite accurate. It's certainly not a satire. But it can function as a straight up adventure story of these two sort of misanthropic scallywags, right? Michael Caine, Master Wayne. Did you know when I was back there in Burma, we found rubies the size of grapefruits? And it's interesting that in the film, he actually, first of all, Michael Caine in the film is wearing the exact same outfit. Well, he's wearing a uniform. It's not an outfit. He's wearing the exact same outfit, the same uniform that he wore in the movie Zulu, which was one of his breakthrough roles. Also one of the great sort of post-colonial British propaganda films in a way. And that then there's a scene where he's talking to Sean Connery, and Connery holds up a ruby. They get in the treasure room, and he holds up a ruby, and then Michael Caine says, "You think that's a ruby? Look at this, right?" And he holds up this ruby, and you can't help but think that plays a role in his later Master Wayne speech. Certainly, it must have been alluding back to that on Nolan's part. But if not, if it wasn't accidental, then I would be surprised. But anyway, regardless of that. So let's talk about, first of all, what happens in the story. You're probably familiar with this. You're certainly familiar with it if you watch Jay's analysis over there, and if you were educated in the canon of literature and the classics, you may remember from when you was just a lad, or maybe you've read it recently. But what happens is basically that the story begins. We are somewhere in the East, and we find out, as the story goes on, that we're in India, and we come upon this writer. And the writer says that the writer is a correspondent for the Northern Star, which we'll talk about the symbolism of that in a little bit. But he then comes across this character named Peachy Carnahan in a train. Peachy robs him of his pocket watch, but then he sort of gives it back to him. It's a whole series of events here where he then gives it back to him because he sees the Masonic emblem on it. And he doesn't want to break his code, his brother's code of not robbing from a fellow Mason. The writer is delighted. Oh, you didn't know you were a fellow craftsman. You were a fellow craftsman or whatever. And then he is supposed to meet up with. He tells him to give a message to his friend who's coming back on the other train, who is Sean Connery. These guys are con men, right? This plays into the role of the confidence man, and they are former soldiers. They're ex-soldiers, and on in the outer dark, in the outer bands of the British Empire, and they're in British India, and then basically, sort of fast forward a little bit, we see Peachy and Daniel Davitt, and they come in and to the office of this journalist. They've been sort of posing as journalists, and the journalist or the writer is again the thinly veiled Rudyard Kipling, and they say, listen, the world isn't big enough for the two of us, so we're going to go off and be kings, right? They're going to go off and be kings. So he says, where are you going to go? Well, they're going to go to this place, Kafiristan, which was a real place, which was one of the sort of smaller provinces. Maybe it's I don't know, it's like a duchy, but it's in the wilds of Afghanistan, in the larger Afghanistan, so one of the sort of warlord kingdoms. And this is where the British Empire has not penetrated, as it says in the book, and they're going to go off there and make their way there and be kings. So they need some information about the geography, the planning, how to get there. And they're provided with this by the writer because, again, they are fellow Masons. Then we see them a little bit later. We come across them, and they are dressed up as sort of madmen, mystics. And this is the way that they're going to get into the wilds of Afghanistan without being killed, right? Because they're going to pretend to be mad, and they're going to give people fake fortunes and make people happy along the way. And there's a lot of almost Blood Meridian imagery in here because we see Davitt dancing like Judge Holden among the holes in the ground and the fires and this sort of, volcanic rock of pandemonium. There are some Miltonian allusions in here, especially with Davitt, and of course the sort of Faustian bargain inherent in this, with the Marlovian imagery and then some Shakespearean imagery. But what happens is they then make their way through Afghanistan, where they are they're about to be robbed, but then they rob the other guys. They kill a bunch of people, and then they come across a marauding band of brigadiers who are going to kill this local village. They've crossed over through the Khyber Pass, through the Khyber Pass, and they are, again, this is sort of mirroring or a reverse mirror of the penetration of Alexander into into Afghanistan, and then Alexander and the legend of Alexander will play a role in the narrative before he takes off through the Hindu Kush, right? Because they're coming from India, and Alexander went to India. So they save this group of people, and then they come across this guy who is a Gurkha. So he knows English, and he says, well, my name, they used to call me in the regiment, they used to call me Billy Fish. So they call him Billy Fish, and Billy Fish is their sort of guide into this. He's sort of a mediary in this kind of Homeric quest. They also met a blind man, a beggar, so we have Homeric elements of here in this as the archetype that sets up the kind of adventure story. And Billy Fish introduces them to this little town, And they, of course, Davitt and Dravit, is it Dravit or Davitt? I can't remember his name now. Dravit. Daniel Dravit. Yeah, Dravit and Peachy have guns. They're armed with, with rifles. And the other people are, of course, armed with sticks and stones and bows and arrows. So they're unhurt. And they prove that they can, they prove their worth essentially by the people are like, are you gods or devils? And they prove their worth by shooting in the film. They shoot a crow. So we have this ominous, we have this omen, right? This death omen for that sort of foreshadows the rest of the events. And they say, are you gods? And Dravit says, we're the next best thing. We're Englishmen. And then what happens is they tell the people, look, we're not going to kill you all. We're going to help you. Who's your enemy? And they say, well, there are these people. There's these people upstream. They've been fouling the stream because it comes down here, right? I don't know why they have Cockney accents, but that's what I'm going to give them. And they say, oh, that's terrible. All right, we'll get him for you. They've been coming. They've been taking their women, stealing their goods. So then they train the men in the village with arms and with swords, and they drill them. Peachy's like sort of the sergeant, and they drill this sort of ragtag crew of outlanders, and they make them into a squad, right? And then they go up and they invade the other people's territory, and then they're about to, when they win. Oh, what happened? Oh, they're fighting, by the way, and Dravit is on horseback and breaks ranks to ride gloriously into the heat of battle. He's a cavalryman, even though Peachy is sort of commanding the forces, and he takes an arrow to the chest, but the arrow doesn't hurt him because it sticks in his bandolier, and he then holds on to this arrow as a kind of a weird totem, which he then in the film will paint gold, and that serves as his sort of scepter, his sign of his warlordism. And be you angels, we are but men. So shouts out to Kristen out there. So then all the people start bowing to him, and they're like, oh, this guy's unhurt in battle. And this is the sort of legend we get with a lot of historical figures. Remember when that happened? There's the account of that happening to George Washington in one of the battles where, he was shot a bunch of times, and he takes off his jacket. He's got bullet holes, but he's unhurt, that sort of thing. But they bow down to him as a kind of a god. But right before the battle, these holy men, they're always closing their eyes because they don't want to open their eyes to the baseness, of this false world, is kind of what they say. And the battle sort of stops while they walk past, and then the battle resumes. But then they start to worship him as a god, and then the locals are about to decapitate the other locals, and they run in. Oi, what the bloody hell is this? There's going to be none of this tomfoolery here. No decapitation, right? And then in the film, the guy that offered his wives and other creeper things to them, and Michael Caine spits out his drink. What degenerate? And this guy's a creep. He raises his hand to Dravit, who then kicks him into the dust, and then he sort of never reappears again. But he's also then later introduced to this. We see this woman Roxanne in the film, played by Shakira Caine, who is Michael Caine's real wife. Beautiful lady. And Roxanne, her name is Roxanne, and that's important because Roxanne is the name of the wife that Alexander took in the same place. So then what happens is this holy man comes around, and they say, you got to come with us. And Billy Fish says, you got to go with them. If these guys say you got to go, you got to go. And Sean Connery in the film, Sean Connery's like, no. We don't have to go with anybody. We rule this place. And they're like, yeah, you rule this place right now, but you're about to commit the unforgivable sin in their language and their culture, which is you're going to lose face because you're presented with some sort of challenge or quest, and you're going to deny it. You're going to lose face, and we're going to be run out of town or killed. So Michael Caine says that fairly wisely. And so they go, and they end up at this mythical plateau, fortress that was built by Alexander 2,200 years before this. And they get up there. They have to cross, by the way, they have to cross an abyss, a chasm to get there, which later they will build a bridge. And Dravit will say, I've built bridges. I've done all this stuff, right? Or I've built bridges. I've done all this stuff, right? And anyway, they get to this place and they go up to the top of the temple, and we see that there is a statue of some sort of pagan deity up there with one eye. So we're like, all right, well, here we go. Illuminate, confirm. And then the priests grab Sean Connery or Dravit, and they are about to, first they're going to shoot him with an arrow. So we get the mirroring of the arrow that didn't pierce him before, but now he's going to be killed. Michael Caine pushes him. And then we get, they bare his chest, and the main priest is about to stab him in the chest. And they don't know what's going on yet still, but they're about to stab him in the chest. But then, lo and behold, Dravit has a necklace with a fob on it, and the fob is the square and compass. It's his Masonic medallion that he's wearing. And the priest goes, oh, and they start bowing to him and worshiping him because, as Billy Fish translates, that is the secret, sacred sign of Alexander. Okay, now, why is this? Well, because the priest goes over and he lifts up this giant stone. There's a stone, of course. There's a, NWO, Gil Bates, Black Cube stone. And they lift it up, and underneath it, on the seat of it, it's got the sign they say that Alexander imprinted there, which is the sign only the priest knows. No, not even the little underlings and the eunuchs know about this. And that is the square and compass with the all-seeing eye in the middle. And they say, you must be Cassander. You must be Cassander, Alexander. Because when Alexander left, apparently he said he would leave, and they all wept and tore their hair and did all that sort of stuff, but that he would return one day. So they think, here comes Alexander. And then Dravit says, I'm not Alexander, but I'm his son. So he buys into this. You remember they're con men, and he's a scallywag, and they buy into this. Their whole mission in going to this was to sort of work their way up a ladder and get riches and, rule over their own land. And then later we're going to see that part of the hubris of this, that plays into their downfall, is that Dravit says that he one day envisions that he will. I'm sort of getting ahead of myself here, but it's important for the analysis right now in that they're going to have a kingdom, and then later on he says, no, we're going to have an empire. And one day I will be able to return to London, and I'll go right up into Buckingham Palace and go up to Queen Victoria, and I'll be able to present my fealty to her and present myself to her, and then she'll knight me. So it's interesting that, like, even though he imagines himself being a king and then an emperor, he's still subject to the Empress Victoria, right? Who was the empress, right? She was Empress of India and all this stuff. And that she would be able to, he'd be enfolded into the warmth of the wings of the British Empire, is what he imagines. But before that, they say, okay, you're the chosen one, you're the prophesied one, so we're going to make you king. So he says, okay. So they robe him they put him in a white robe, and they give him his gold arrow scepter. And they, in the book, he actually grabs the crown and places it on his own head, which is reminiscent of William I, right? Or even of Napoleon. It's actually probably more reminiscent of Napoleon crowning himself, because this is a classical liberal Enlightenment era sort of quasi propaganda piece, and they're Napoleonic in a way because they are former soldiers on the outer bands of the empire, but they are also middlemen. They're common men. They're described as loafers and intermediates early on in the text, which is important because they are neither part of the British elite, who, as it says in the book, which I'll get to in a minute, that that are busy with the governance of the empire, but they're also not at the lowest end of the totem pole. So they serve the empire, but they're sort of in the middle. And that's kind of what plays into their downfall, because they don't really fit in anywhere. And then later when they're unmasked as frauds by the locals, we'll see what happens to them. So So anyway, so Dravit, or Sean Connery, is crowned king, and he immediately sets about sort of playing this, pseudo Solomonic role of like arbitrating local disputes. And he's, of course, set up on his throne in between these twin pillars, and there's a temple behind them, which is supposed to, obviously, in the imagery, be a kind of mockery or pseudo Temple of Solomon. But we'll see that it's actually, these people they're a human sacrifice. They're pagans and they're a human sacrifice cult. It's called Kafiristan because they are the non-believers or the idolatrous. And the name is actually changed now to the enlightened region. I think it's Numistan now. But so then what happens is they are sort of comfortable with what they have. The priests lead them down into the inner bowels of the temple, into their pagan sanctum sanctorum, which is the treasure room. And they are amazed because they see that they have all their. It's kind of funny because in the film they're like, we have all the treasures. We have all the treasures of the world here. We're the richest men in England. No, Earth. We're the richest men on Earth. And it's like, no, you're not. This room isn't that big. All right. But they do find like treasure chests with gold coins. They are incredibly rich now, but of course they are rich, but they're not inner rich. They're outer rich. And of course they are also isolated. They're in exile, far away from anybody that would care about this. So they open the treasure chest, the treasure hoard, and we see these coins, minted with the face of Alexander on them. So that confirms the Alexandrian notions of the provenance of this pagan, outer kingdom or whatever. And they also see the rubies. We found rubies the size of a fist of a grapefruit, Master Wayne. And Sean Connery's like, it's a rubies. So, sorry, terrible impression. And they find all these jewels and all this stuff. But the thing is that the priest obviously holds sway over the people, because they're in this sort of pagan, demigod kingdom where they have this sort of priest king, and now Sean Connery is going to become the actual pagan priest king in this place. And there are some discussions about are we committing idolatry, and Michael Caine, Peachy says no, because we're not pretending to be God. We're pretending just to be their gods. But we're going to see what that means. But later on, they live there. They keep going and doing their thing. As Sean Connery is the king, and Michael Caine is sort of his emissary or his sergeant or his Beelzebub, really. And it's funny because when Michael Caine returns, see, the story is told through the eyes of Peachy, who leaves at the beginning. It's a framed narrative. So at the beginning of the story, we meet him, and he's telling the writer or the speaker what's happening. And then he returns and says, so we get a time jump of a few years, and he comes back, and he's this beggar, and he says, I'm back, and we was kings. But what's interesting is that Michael Caine is never a king. He's never actually a monarch. It's Sean Penn. Sean Penn. That would be a different movie. It's Sean Connery. But they are sort of these Masonic enlightened. There's a lot of the Masonic imagery within the book and the movie is heavy, purposefully. But he gets back and he says, and he's not blind, but he's almost blind, and he's got he's toting this bag with him, which we don't know what's in it yet. So, but what happens is Sean Connery says, "Look, man, we got to move on in this quest here, and I need to take a wife." And Peachy says, you can't take a wife. You remember the contract, because it's interesting that the idea of the contract early on in the text, they sign a contract with each other in the presence of their brother, their Masonic brother, the writer, and there's a binding contract. They essentially have 3 rules. It's like, and one of them is no women. They won't get involved with the women in the local populace when they get there until they have met the king or whatever. And what happens, the reason for their downfall is that Sean Connery or Dravit breaks two of the things in the contract. And the reason this is allegorical is because in terms of the Masonic allegory, one thing he does is he kind of backstabs Peachy because Peachy says, okay, a little bit later, he's like, Peachy, there's no more need for you here. You know, you're a great sergeant, and you're a great guy, but we need to find bigger people to run this empire, so I'm going to run it alone. And Peachy's like, okay, well, to hell with you. And they're not supposed to do that, right? I mean, even in terms of just basic regular friendship, it's this buddy movie, and then he decides, nope. We're gonna help each other to get to this place, and then when we get there, I'm gonna be the king, and then I'm gonna step on your face, and because I've used you to get here. Is sort of what we read from it. The other thing is he breaks the contract of the women. Michael Caine is like, look, man, it's not just. He's wise in this, in that he's like, it's not just that we can't get into like having women in the place. It's because we're alone here, and it's the two of us, and their local customs. There are going to be outcomes that we don't even know yet. So don't do this. And Sean Connery has kind of a good response to this, a rebuttal. He says, look, the contract said no women, but I don't want a woman. I want a wife. And I need to have a wife so that I can establish my reign here, and then our son can continue to reign. Which, okay, well, that makes sense. Except for the fact that when he announces this, the local priest, he's like, what are you talking about? You want a wife? You can't. You're supposed to be the god. You're supposed to be Alexander returned. You can't have a wife. And he tells him to bring him Roxanne, the beautiful woman that he saw, Shakira Kane, and she's all trembling, and they're like, why is she trembling? And they're like, well, in their custom and in their pagan religion, they've been told that like if they they can't be first of all, they can't even be in the presence of the god. And second of all, if they like touch him, then she'll burn to death because of his brilliance. So that's a little fishy, right? Because she's scared. But then Sean Connery's like, no, look, I can do whatever I want. You told me I could do whatever I want. I can have the treasure. I can do whatever I want. So I'm going to take a wife. This is what we're going to do. We're going to establish this. So he decides to have a wedding. The night before the wedding, they hear these like screams and stuff outside, and we're never really told or shown what it is, but they show the temple over yonder, and we can tell that like there's probably a human sacrifice going on, right? And the next day they prepare for the, and they're like, oh well, whatever, he's fucking, what the kind of thing they say that I can't say here, and they decide to have the wedding anyway. But what happens is they bring in Roxanne, they strew flowers everywhere. It's this big celebration. All the villages and all that. They've got a huge train of hangers on and people and all these armed men that they've trained. They've got an army, and now it's pretty big. And they're on top of this plateau. They're on top of this Prester John, Old Man of the Mountain, which plays into the Masonic and the Templar legends. But this precedes the Templar stories, the medieval Templar stories, because it's Masonic, and it's supposed to go back to essentially to Hiram Abiff and the building of the Temple of Solomon, right? And they're basically trying to say that Alexander was one of these people, and that the Masons built all the empires of the earth is their little allegory, right? And so the wedding day, they bring Roxanne up, and it's supposed to be a mirror of Alexander and Roxanne in history getting married between the twin pillars. And she comes up, and basically Sean Connery usurps the role of the actual priest, right? And sort of he declares himself married to her. But what happens is, yeah, Jason, for real. So what happens is he puts the ring on his own finger. He's like, Peachy, give me the ring. No, he's like, Peachy, where's the ring? And Michael Caine's like, oh, I got the ring right here. That's so bad. I got to get this straight, y'all, because I'm playing them both as Michael Caine. That's not really accurate. But so Peachy gives him the ring. He puts it on himself. He goes to kiss Roxanne, and bam, she bites him. She bites him on the cheek, which is kind of, that's interesting because remember we talked about that in the Sylvia Plath, Ted Hughes stream where they met at that party in Cambridge, and she bit him in the cheek, drew blood. And, of course, them being both into the occult, they loved it. But instead, in this, he's like, the slut bit me. That's what he says. He doesn't give her a Barbara Wawa whap. Instead, he just says that. And that's bad, because what happens is the priest now says, neither God nor devil, but a man. He's a man. And this also plays into the historical, the story of Herodotus of Xerxes, right? And remember in 300, this is Sparta. Remember he throws the javelin up there and he slices Xerxes on the cheek, and he can bleed. So if he can bleed, he's like in Predator. If it bleeds, we can kill it, right? So they say, oh no, this guy's a fraud, and they immediately turn against him. And Peachy's like, we gotta get out of here. We've got to get out of here. So they turn around and they hightail it, and they try to. Peachy had already loaded up the train of donkeys with his a big portion of the treasure, and Dravitt's like, take it, whatever you want, take the treasure, but he stayed for the wedding. Big mistake. Well, not a mistake because he's his friend, but the mistake is that it happened in the first. The mistake is any of this happens in the first place. Peachy had stayed to be his best man. I'll be your best man. And then they turn against him. They run off. They're being chased by the villagers. They shoot like a bunch of people. All of their riflemen also, they get killed because they're getting overwhelmed by this giant mob. They get encircled. And then what happens is they take Sean Connery and they take him over to the bridge that he built across this chasm, and now he's standing in the middle of this bridge, which is, of course, the bridge between the twin pillars, between Yakin and Boaz, and he's going to fall instead of his Masonic transcendence into the Westworld, outer zone of enlightenment. He falls into the abyss. And Peachy says, we fell 20,000 feet right at the base of this glacier in Caddyshack. He falls tumbling head over heel. And right before that, Dravitt, this is part of the Masonic allegory, that Dravitt basically says, look, it's my fault. I got you out here. I got you into this mess. Will you forgive me? And he's like, of course I forgive you. And he's like, well, it's done then. And they're forgiven because they're brothers again. But it doesn't matter because he'd already betrayed him in a sense. And then he falls into the chasm. And then we know that Peachy is put up between two trees, between two pillars, right, between the twin pillars, and he is crucified. They crucify him to let him hear the screams of Dravitt, his friend, while they, guess what? They take his head off. And they let Peachy live because they say he's up there for 2 days, and they say, nobody could survive this, but you survived, so now you get to wander on back to where you came from. And he says he wanders back with the mountains and the stars falling on him, and he says, I never let go of, he says, Peachy never let go of my hand, and I never let go of his head. And then we cut back to the post office there with the writer, with Rudyard Kipling in the film, at least, played by Christopher Plummer. I love Christopher Plummer. And he's on the cover, the little picture I showed on the thumbnail of the Tempest that I did recently. He was in a great version of King Lear, by the way, about 10 years ago in D.C. But anyway, so he takes out his satchel, opens up his bag, and in his bag he has the decrepit head of Dravitt, complete with the golden diadem, the crown. And he walks off, and that's the end of the film. But in the book, he takes off outside, and he's seen kind of standing around, wandering mad. And then the writer comes out and says, what happened to him? I saw him out here yesterday, and a guy comes up and says, no, the missionaries took him off, and they took him to the asylum, and he had a bare head for all the live long day. The bare head because he's crownless, but he's also sunstroked in his enlightenment, right? And then he dies. And he says, let the matter rest there. So Michael Caine gets to live, Peachy gets to live because they say he never did anything to us, even though he killed like half the people there. But whatever, he never did anything to them. And of course, now he has been through the suffering and the eternal return of the quest back to them. Also, the decapitated head is an important symbol in this because it plays into the Masonic imagery of the Templar idea, the Templar roots of Masonry, which is remember that Friday the 13th, is when they were burned at the stake. Part of we covered this in the Outremer stream, right, in the Templar book. They were accused of worshiping the disembodied head. Some thought that it was the head of John the Baptist, but Jay covered this, right, in his Northman stream. We have a lot of these weird secret societies, cults, and especially pagans who are always worshiping disembodied heads. And of course, he carries back the disembodied head with the crown. And that's the end of the story. So let's get into some of the part. That's an overview of the text. I know that wasn't a basic overview, but that was what happens in the story. And so let's talk about some of the elements within the text and look at the form and the content. First of all, I can't help but immediately think of Shelley at the beginning of this because, I met a traveler from an antique land, right? So it's Ozymandias. And remember the poem Ozymandias, look on my works, ye mighty, in despair, is that man builds himself up into this colossus of Rhodes, right? Into this gigantic golden idol of a thing, only to be brought down in their hubris, right? Because of their thinking that they can dominate but in the emptiness of their values and their insides, and I can't help but think of that in the text. I also wrote at the beginning of this, we found rubies the size of grapefruits, Master Wayne. Oh, Master Wayne. Remember when he cries? Master Wayne, your father. Remember that? But it begins with a Masonic first line, brother to a prince and fellow to a beggar if he be found worthy, which is Masonic vernacular, or Masonic diction, rather. First of all, it begins with brother, and they call themselves brother because they are brothers in the craft. And fellow to a beggar, this kind of embodies what I guess Masons would probably say about their ethos, their brotherhood of man ethos, if there is one. If he be found worthy, right? Worthy, brother. Worthy is a kind of I don't know if it's accurate to say a watchword, but it's a potent word in the diction of Freemasonry. The law, as quoted, lays down a fair conduct of life and one not easy to follow. I've been fellow to a beggar again and again under circumstances which prevented either of us finding out whether the other was worthy. I have still to be brother to a prince, though I once came near to kinship with what might have been a veritable king and was promised the reversion of a kingdom, army, law courts, revenue, and policy all complete. But today I greatly fear that my king be dead. And if I want a crown, I must go and hunt it for myself. The beginning of everything was in a railway train upon the road to Mahal from Ajmer. The beginning of everything. We begin at the beginning. There has been a deficit in the budget. They talk about the intermediate classes on the train, all being, he says, which is Eurasian or native, which for a long night journey is nasty, or loafer, which is amusing, though intoxicated. Intermediates do not patronize refreshment rooms. They carry their food in bundles and pots and buy sweets from the native sweetmeat sellers and drink the roadside water. That is why in the hot weather, intermediates are taken out of the carriages dead, and in all the weathers are most properly looked down upon. And we see that in the movie, because we see Christopher Plummer and Mark O'Kane in this train car. And they stop they stop, and one of the local fellows gets in, and he says, "Very pleased to meet." I won't do the accent because it doesn't sound right. But maybe I'll just for this part. I'm very pleased to meet you. And he has a dang watermelon, and Michael Caine is just looking at him with utter disgust. Right, this guy's getting on the train with a watermelon, and we know that Michael, we know Peachy Carnan is a former soldier out there in the East for Queen and country. He even says at one point, look, we fight for each other. They say we fight for Queen and country, but if they had told us we were fighting for Victoria, nobody would be fighting. So we're fighting, he says that kind of thing later on. But the guy gets in the train, and Michael Caine's, he's so disgusted. And this is authentic especially for the time, and it's kind of emblematic of the Victorian era in the first place, because as I'll get to with this Piers Brendan book, one of the reasons for the collapse of the colonies and the idea of losing face and the superiority of the Englishmen, which is accurate for the time in terms of their sort of methodology of rule and their ethos. And the guy cuts into his watermelon. He offers Michael Caine some. Michael Caine says, yeah, get up. Oh, it's your stop. The guy gets up, looks out the window. Michael Caine, he says, out you go, Jim Jam, or whatever, and throws him out the train. Then that's when he claims, oh, that guy stole your watch, right? And the Kipling character, Christopher Plummer, is like, oh, thank you very much. And then when he gets off the train, he says, by the way, I knew I was missing my watch earlier, but, it's nice to meet a fellow brother. And he returns his watch to him because when he finds out it's a Mason, he has to return it to him because there's an oath in Masonry about that you shall not rob from a fellow Mason, which is interesting because it's not, you shouldn't rob in the first place. It's just you shouldn't rob from him. But anyway, that sets in motion their events. He says, my particular intermediate happened to be empty till I reached Nazirabad, where a huge gentleman in shirt sleeves entered, and following the custom of the intermediates past the time of day, he was a wanderer and a vagabond like myself, but with an educated taste for whiskey. So that's another thing, is that they bond, Peachy and the writer bond over their whiskey. He offers him a pinch of whiskey, and he says, oh, that's, Macallan 15-year-old or whatever. He says, oh, not only a Mason, but a fellow whiskey drinker. And they're traveling westward. Masonic symbolism we get on page 5, where he says, where have you come from, said I. From the east, said he, and I'm hoping that you will give him the measure on the square for the sake of my mother as well as your own. On the square is obviously a Masonic term. It's also capitalized in the text, the square. Just like, did you know the term on the level? I'm not sure if squared away is Masonic. It's probably a ship's right term, but it certainly sounds as such. But when he says it here in the text, that's what he means, on the square. Englishmen are not usually softened by appeals to the memory of their mothers, but for certain reasons, which will be fully apparent, I saw fit to agree. That's because they're brothers. They're brothers in their Masonic craft, right? And it's interesting, he says Englishmen are not softened by appeals to their mothers because, as we've discussed so many times in terms of the prep school, raising of the governors of the empire, right? They are in this sort of quasi-psychopathic system where the mother instinct is drilled out of them through contiguous years at the prep school, right? Again, Jay has discussed that in depth also. So on page 7, this says, they do not understand that nobody cares a straw for the internal administration of the native states. The native states have a wholesome horror of English newspapers. So long as oppression and crime are kept within decent limits and the ruler is not drugged, drunk, or diseased from one end of the year to the other. Native states were created by Providence in order to supply picturesque scenery, tigers, and tall riding. So the tall riding is basically a description or an image for the Hindi and the Sanskrit writing of the locals. The British Empire also is such that we're going to discuss in a second the mechanics of the empire and how it was run, according to this book. But it's interesting they say not drunk, drugged, or diseased, because we see all these sort of local chieftains, warlords, and suzerains, and that continues to this day in the Game of Nations and the Grand Chessboard, right? And of course, it takes place in Afghanistan, right? The cradle of opium, the Golden Crescent. And you can picture, they don't name Helmand province, but you can see them sort of walking through these places in your mind, in the text. Let's see. On page 10, it says, and all the time the telephone bell is ringing madly and kings are being killed on the continent and empires are saying, you're another. And Mr. Gladstone is calling down brimstone upon the British dominions. And the little copy boys are whining like tired bees. And most of the paper is as blank as Mordred's shield. Interesting, we get Mordred's shield as an image there. Mordred is the son of Morgan Le Fay, right, who is the sister of Merlin in the Arthurian tales, right, in Le Morte d'Arthur and in Chrétien de Troyes in the Arthurian romances. And Mordred is the one who pierces Arthur in this with this sort of Lance of Longinus esque movement that then Arthur, but he also has his mortal wound before Arthur goes off into Avalon. But what that serves to do in the text is give us kind of a mythical or pseudo-religious or mythical provenance for the quest that these guys are going to go on. This says, something on page 11 I found interesting. It says, then the sickness really breaks out, and the less recording and reporting, the better for the peace of the subscribers. But the empires and the kings continue to divert themselves as selfishly as before. And the foreman thinks that a daily paper really ought to come out once in 24 hours, and all the people at the hill stations in the middle of their amusements say, good gracious, why can't the paper be sparkling? I'm sure there's plenty going on up here. So, in other words, what he's saying is that, like, the governing in the empire continues on as it did before, and they are diverted with various things, and they will look away or turn a blind eye or not even know about this taking of Kafiristan that's going to occur in the text. And that it's an interesting juxtaposition between the actual events that are occurring on the outside in the empire or in the colonies versus the reaction to it by the people at their breakfast table reading the paper. And that's now. That's still what occurs now, right? The war happens and it's fine as long as it's far away over there and not here. And people here fret and moan about it because they hear about it on the news or, on Twitter or whatever. But there's this weird chasm between the two. There's this sort of cognitive dissonance that occurs between the action and the reality, which is what T.S. Eliot is discussing partly or mentioning or alluding to in The Hollow Men. It doesn't seem real, but it is real. On page 12, it says, I wrote, constitutions are below the pyramid cap, the winds of change. Yeah, because he says it was in that season, in a remarkably evil season, that the paper began running the last issue on the week of Saturday night. Later, one Saturday night, it was my pleasant duty to put the paper to bed alone. A king or courtier or a courtesan or a community. I like how he has that's almost poetic right there, that line, because it's unification. It's unity and variety, right? It's what Whitman does in Song of Myself, which is we have all the various outreaches of the empire or the continent in Song of Myself, but they're all unified by this common K sound, right? Which is almost verse-like. A king or a courtier or a courtesan or a community was going to die or get a new constitution or do something that was important on the other side of the world. And the paper was to be held open to the latest possible minute in order to catch the telegram. In other words, all this stuff is happening in the empire, and the paper itself has to stay open. The guys, remember, Kipling serves as a newspaperman in this, or a publisher. And it has to stay open for the people back home, back east, right? Or back west in their sense, to know about what's to keep up to date with what's happening. Then on page 13, then the roar and rattle of the wheels shivered the quiet into little bits. I rose to go away, but two men in white clothes stood in front of me. The first one said, "It's him." The second one said, "So it is." And they both laughed as loudly as the machinery roared and mopped their foreheads. A lot of the greetings in this are, I don't know for sure because we don't really know, but a lot of the greetings in this are, by the way, can you tell I broke my nose, you guys? I'm being for real here. I broke my nose last week. I walked into I don't know if I should share this with y'all, but whatever. I'm going to. I walked into a dang iron bar in a dark auditorium, and bam, right into my nose. And hopefully it kind of broke it back normal because it was already broke. But I broke my dang nose. So can you tell? All right, whatever. Don't look too closely at it. But yeah, it's broke. So anyway, page 13. Oh yeah. So what I was saying was the greetings that occur between these guys is emblematic of the kind of Masonic watchwords and greetings amongst that are supposed to be spoken, like when fellow brothers of the craft or whatever meet each other in foreign places, right? That's how they identify each other, and it's supposed to be symbolic or allegorical of the greetings that they do it. Yeah, since I pointed it out, now don't look at it. In the construction of the temple. So it says, let's see. So on page, hold on. On page 14, it says, we'd like some drink. The contract doesn't begin yet, Peachy, so you needn't look, but what we really want is advice. We don't want money. We ask you as a favor because you did us a bad turn about Degumber. I fled from the press room to the... I don't know what that means. I fled from the press room to the stifling office with the maps on the walls. The red-haired man rubbed his hands. That's something like, said he, this was the proper shop to come to. Now, sir, let me introduce to you Brother Peachy Carnahan. That's him. And Brother Daniel Dravett. That is me. And the less said about our professions, the better. For we have been most things in our time. Soldier, sailor, compositor, photographer, proofreader, street preacher, and correspondents of the backwoodsman when we thought the paper wanted one. Carnahan is sober, and so am I. Look at us first and see that's sure. I will save you cutting into my talk. We'll take one of your cigars apiece, and you shall see us light. I watched the test. The men were absolutely sober, so I gave them each a tepid peg. A tepid peg. So look, they introduced themselves as brothers, right? In their Masonic greeting. And the fact, we also are introduced here to the fact that these guys are, what are they? They're raconteurs, they're scallywags, they're con men. They've been everything and done everything and gone everywhere. And it says, let me talk now, Dan. We've been all over India, mostly on foot. We have been boiler fitters, engine drivers, petty contractors, and all that, and we've decided that India isn't big enough for such as us. Leave it alone and let us govern, the government is saying. Therefore, such it is as it is, we will let it alone and go away to some other place where a man isn't crowding and come to his own. We are not little men, and there's nothing that we're afraid of except drink, and we have signed a contract on that. Therefore, we are going away to be kings. And they're going to go to Kafiristan, and then on page 16 it says, they have 32 heathen idols there, and will be the 33rd, Luminate confirm. It's a mountainous country, and women of those parts are very beautiful. They say that because they're Masons, right? We shall go to those parts and say to any king we find, do you want to vanquish our foes? And we will show him how to drill men, and for that we know better than anything else. Then we will subvert the king and seize his throne and establish a dynasty. Once again, let me remind you guys, this is our homeboy Presley out there. Shouts out to our homeboy, our generous homeboy, who dropped some fat Dugan coin, 100 Kong bucks to sponsor this stream. So if you want to sponsor a stream, you can reach out to me, madmaximalism2x's@gmail.com, or you can hit that super chat button, or you can donate via PayPal or Cash App, which is the best. PayPal, Cash App, Venmo, that gets right to me. And you can sponsor a stream, and I'll deep dive into it for you. We did the book and the film for this one. We're also going to be going into some more of his choices. He also recommended I think the Treasure of the Sierra Madre and the Maltese Falcon. But right now we're just doing Kipling. Coming up, we're going to be doing Don DeLeo's Libra, some more Shakespeare, Gnosticism and Neoplatonism in Shakespeare, and a couple of other things. So this says on page 17, I uncased the big 32 miles to the inch map of India and two smaller frontiers map, hauled down the volume Infcon and the Encyclopedia Britannica. The men consulted them. And that reminded me of the acronym for Pakistan. I don't know if you guys know this. I'm sure y'all do because you're, you're high IQ audience. But if you're watching this, you may not know this. Why am I being redirected? What is that about? That was weird. You may not know this, that Pakistan itself is an acronym. Did you know that? It's an acronym the British made up when they drew up the map. And it stands for Punjab, Afghanistan, Kashmir, Isfahan. Did you know that? I think it's Isfahan, either Isfahan or Indus. But it's an acronym. Let's see. The contract between the two men, which is witnessed and signed by their other brother, who is Kipling. Kipling really was a Mason. He writes about it and he says so, which I'll read in a minute. But he really was a Mason. The film version, I mean, I think it's obvious that Sean Connery and Michael Caine were Masons. As Jamie and Jay mentioned in their stream, like almost all of Connery's movies have a Masonic element. Zardoz especially, which Jay writes about extensively in ESO Hollywood there. But, I mean, even his character in The Rock is named Mason. But there are a lot of these with Sean Connery. And that wouldn't be unusual for him. I mean, why would we imagine he wouldn't have been? And then, of course, John Huston. John Huston was a Mason. And John Huston directed the film. John Huston also, a great point brought out by Jay and Jamie, was that John Huston was friends with the Black Dahlia crowd in the 30s, right? With, what's the name of the photographer? Man Ray. Man Ray and the Black Dahlia crowd in L.A. in the 30s. Chinatown has elements of this. A lot of John Huston films have an element of, a reveal, a climactic reveal of something kind of gruesome. I mean, think about Chinatown, for example, right? Pretty gruesome creeper territory. And this one's kind of no exception. And this is a great film because it's an adventure story. It's got a warmth to the cinematography. It's like two best buds, dudes being dudes. But it also has this, blatant Masonic allegory or a parable that sort of overrides it. And we see that this one thing that makes it a good story is the fact that it doesn't end the way you think it's going to end, right? It doesn't, if you've never read the book or you've never seen the movie, you think that, they're going to go off and they're going to do this and they're going to, it's going to ride into the East and live happily ever after. But instead, the cowboy returns home with no horse and a head in his hands, and it's pretty bleak, right? Jason said, it's so easy to break a nose, so probably didn't take much at all against iron. No, I walked full speed. Into a horizontal iron bar, and it went bam. And at first, it was last week, and my first thought was that a ghoul or a goblin had hit me in the face with some kind of spear. That was literally my first thought. But whatever. What can you do, right? What can you do? And there it is. So whatever. But listen, man, you got to take them punches. You got to take them punches like a man and keep on going. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Cry about it? Whatever, man. I'm a 42-year-old dude. It's fine. I didn't pull a Zoolander or something and worry about my face. So anyway, it says on page 19, you two are fools. It's so easy being a king as it looks. When we've got our kingdom in going order, we'll let you know, and you can come up and help us govern it. And the contract between these guys, it was a mole goblin, says This contract between me and you pursuing witnesseth in the name of God, amen, and so forth. 1, that me and you will settle this matter together, i.e. to be kangs of Kafiristan. 2, that you and me will not, while this matter is being settled, look at any liquor nor any women so as to get mixed up with one of the other harmful. 3, that we conduct ourselves with dignity and discretion, and if one of us gets into trouble, the other will stay by him. Well, that's interesting because that's what causes their downfall later, because Sean Connery decides to sort of do away with Peachy. Not do away with him, but do away with him like, no, you got to go. You got to get out of here. And Michael Caine says, look, man, come with me. All right, you come with me. And he's trying to divert trouble because he knows trouble is coming up. But when they do actually get in trouble, they don't abandon each other. But again, they sort of get what they get. And it's signed by both gentlemen at large. On page 21, we get the Foursquare Sink of Humanity. This is interesting because they get the mention of, be sure to come down to Sarai tomorrow, were the parting words. Sarai is, they're in India. But when I lived in Malaysia for a summer, I lived on Jalan Sarai, which is an Indo-Malayan word, Malay word. And then it says, the Kumarsan Sarai is the great Foursquare Sink of humanity, where the strings of camels and horses from the north load and unload. The paper is called the North Star. And as Jamie pointed out in the stream, the North Star is inherent in Masonic symbolism. Polaris, Eye of Venus, always has every Masonic lodge has the star in it. And even a lot of fraternities have this, a star and crescent. But they are in the crescent, or then what they call it, the Foursquare Sink of Humanity. Foursquare, get it? And the Sink of Humanity is the sort of basin or abyss into which they are about to travel. And this brings out this sort of Miltonian imagery. There's a scene later on in the text where Dravit is reclining on a rock. And then he has to, of course, cross the abyss. They cross and then recross the abyss, which is pure Miltonian imagery. I'm going to skip ahead here and give you some of the other elements in this. One is when they get to, on page 22, "O priest, whence you come and whither do you go?" That's Masonic. That's a Masonic greeting. And then, let's see. Also, it brings to mind, "Where are you going and where have you been?" Remember the Joyce Carol Oates stream that we did, which was the short story dealing with the Bob Dylan song? And then we see that Dravit has clothed himself in the garb of a mad priest or a fortune teller. And it says he spread out the skirts of his gabardine and pirouetted between the lines of tethered horses, which also brings to mind, again, Judge Holden dancing mad on the burning plain in Blood Meridian. It says, "There starts a caravan from Peshawar to Kabul in 20 days. Huzrat," said the trader, "my camels go therewith. Do thou also go and bring us good luck." It's interesting, the diction there. Why the archaic thou? Well, because Kipling is pretty expert in clothing his easy-to-read, common speech adventure story with allusions and mythical provenance, right? The thou there, the archaic thou, functions as both a kind of quasi-Masonic greeting, but also as it's emblematic of giving them a sort of pseudo-religious quest for their con man adventure. "Come thou also, Shahib, a little along the road, and I will see thee a charm, an amulet that shall make thee king of Kafiristan. Then the light broke upon me, and I followed the two camels out of the Sarai till we reached open road, and the priest halted." The light breaking upon me, right? The illuminate light. They also, Jason mentions each sentence is wearing a Masonic apron. I mean, they when they clothe him in the priestly garbs of the king, when they make Dravit the king, they literally give him and it's in the thumbnail. They literally give him a Masonic apron, right? He's got the all-seeing eye on his chest, and then he's wearing a Masonic apron. And one thing that is interesting here is the fact that they, when they greet each other, and especially when they greet Billy Fish, they're greeted with the Masonic grip, and these people are educated or have been raised, as I think they say in Masonry, they've been raised to Masonic levels, and then they establish their kingdom along Masonic lines, like literally in the text. It's not, this isn't subtext, this is literally in the text. They decide to form a lodge, a grand lodge, and that is how they run their new kingdom. And then they elevate various members of the tribe to brotherhood, but not all of them, so that they still have something to want to achieve. And that, I think, plays into the reality of the game of nations and the grand chessboard and how these things are run. Page 26, we get the revelatory, says, he passed through Peshawar and associated himself to the second summer caravan that goes through Kabul. The merchants are pleased because though superstition, they imagine that such mad fellows bring good fortune. The wheel of fortune and the wheel of the world swings through the same phases again and again. Page 26. Summer passed and winter thereafter and came and passed again. A few great men had died in the past 2 years. The machines worked with more clatter, and some of the trees in the office garden were a few feet taller, but that was all the difference. He was bent into a circle. On page 24, not yet, but we shall soon. Give us a memento of your kindness, brother. Beg, borrow, or steal. You did me a service yesterday. Half my kingdom shall you have, as the saying is. I slipped a small charm compass from my watch chain and handed it to the priest. There's also continuous mention of the Masonic whirligigs. On page 28, true is gospel. Kings we were, with crowns upon our heads. Dravit dressed as a mad priest, and you his servant. Ragged, red, diamond-shaped scar. Dravit in the book has flaming red hair and a red beard, and he's always described as chewing his beard. But in the film, it's Sean Connery. And what's interesting about this also is that Sean Connery doesn't wear a wig. It's a wig. I wear a wig. Remember Billy Zane? Billy Zane, we want you in Titanic, but we don't know what to do with your hair. What do you want to do with it? Well, I'll go bald or I'll wear a wig. It's easy. You just wear a wig. But Sean Connery doesn't wear a wig in this one. This was Sean Connery's favorite film to make also. And at one point, I also read that they threatened to walk off the film if Christopher Plummer was not kept on in the film, because the studio wanted to get rid of Christopher Plummer. They probably kept him on also because he was a fellow Mason. But anyway, and also there was mistreatment of the locals and all this stuff in the filmmaking. It was filmed in Morocco. Let's see. We get a Homeric sort of blind beggar on page. These guys kill indiscriminately when they get to places. Dravit takes her back to the first village and counts up the dead. Eight there was. For each dead man, Dravit pours a little milk on the ground and waves his arms like a whirligig and says, "That's all right," says he. "Go and dig the land and be fruitful and multiply." There we get the Genesis imagery. They are consciously mimicking Genesis imagery in their sort of neo-Gnostic pagan kingdom, which they're going to usurp through their confidence man antics. Let's see. Page... Carnahan on page 36 is a kind of quasi-Beelzebub to Dravit's Satan. The Carnahan goes alone to the chief and asks him in dumb show if he had an enemy he hated. Carnahan does everything for him. Let's see. I remember on page 37, there had once come to the office a blind man with a knotted twig and a piece of string which he would wound round the twig according to some cipher of his own. He could, after the lapse of days or hours, repeat the sentence which he had reeled up. He had reduced the alphabet to 11 primitive sounds and tried to teach me his method, but failed. Kipling's really great at describing this stuff because, remember, he grew up in British India. here we get the craft on page 38. Speaking of the craft, yeah, I think hopefully, yeah, Rachel and David Patrick Harry and I are going to do an analysis of the movie The Craft. So I'm looking forward to that. If whenever we can all or everybody can get around to it. Shouts out to our homeboy out there, DPH, and to Base Homeschool Mom. Shouts out to Rachel. On page 38, it says, "I've got the key of the whole show, and you'll see, and I've got a crown for you. I told them to make 2 of them at a place called Shoe, where the gold lies in the rock like suet and mutton. Gold I've seen, and turquoise I've kicked out of the cliffs, and there's garnets in the sands of the river. And here's a chunk of amber that a man bought me. Call up the priests, and here, take your crown, a chunk of amber." It's like Jurassic Park. Dino DNA. Wha-bam. Dino DNA. Peachy, says Drabbit, "We don't want to fight no more. The craft's the trick, so help me." The craft, capitalized C. And he brings forward that same chief that I left at Bashkai. Billy Fish, we called him afterwards, because he was so like Billy Fish that drove the big tank engine at Mach on the Bolin in the old days. "Shake hands with him," said Drabbit, and I shook hands and nearly dropped, for Billy Fish gave me the grip. I said nothing, but tried him with the fellow craft grip. He answers, "All right," and I tried the master's grip, but that was a slip. "A fellow craft he is," says I to Dan. "Does he know the word? Does he know the word, the watchword?" "He does," says Dan, "and all the priests know. It's a miracle. The chiefs and the priests can work a fellow craft lodge in a way that's very like ours, and they've cut the marks on the rocks, but they don't know the 3rd degree, and they've come to find out. It's Gord's truth. I've known these long years after the Afghans knew up to the fellow craft degree, but this is a miracle. A god and a grand master of the craft am I, and a lodge in the 3rd degree I will open, and will raise the head priests and the chiefs of the villages. It's against the law," I says, "holding a lodge without warrant from anyone, and we never held office in any lodge. It's a master stroke of policy," says Drabbit. "It means running the country as easy as a 4-wheeled bogey on a downgrade. We can't stop to inquire now, or they'll turn against us. I've 40 chiefs at my heel, and passed and raised according to their merit they shall be. Billet these men on the villages, and see that we run up a lodge of some kind. The temple of Imbra will do for the lodge room. The women must make aprons as you show them. I'll hold a levy of chiefs tonight, and lodge tomorrow." Page 40, "I was fair rim off my legs, but I wasn't such a fool as not to see what a pull this craft business gave us. I showed the priest families how to make aprons of the degrees, but for Drabbit's apron, the blue border and marks was made of turquoise lumps on white hide, not cloth. We took a great square stone in the temple for the master's chair, and little stones for the officers' chairs, and painted the black pavement with white squares, and did what we could to make things regular." So you get it? They set up their kingdom like it's a Masonic lodge. And of course, this plays into their downfall, right? They are under the all-seeing eye of Imbra, the pagan demon god. And they set up their little, black and white checkerboard floor with stones. At the levee, which was held that night on the hillside with big bonfires, Drabbit gives out that him and me were gods and sons of Alexander, the past grand masters in the craft. Jay pointed out that, one of the things that happens in this book is that we see that the local religions are a con, right? That the British use to subvert power and to usurp, right? They claim to be, worshipers of this thing and to be embodiments of this god, but they're not. And that's part of the critique, right? That Kipling offers. Although it's not quite the critique you think it is, because it's more of it's a critique from the inner side of the propaganda machine, I think, which is that, this is the way things are run, except these guys screw it up in this way, but here's how to do it, if that makes sense. And the resolution that we're offered is that even though they have broken the bonds of their own oaths, that they come together in the end in their sort of, brotherhood. But their brotherhood is this brotherhood of man under the eye of this Imbra demon, right? They're still friends, but then he's forced to carry back the head of his friend and fall into the ruin and degradation of his Enlightenment, right? Which is the liberal Enlightenment, the classical liberal Enlightenment of the Masonic neoclassical ethos, I suppose. This says, the most amazing miracle was at the lodge the next night. Page 41. One of the old priests was watching us continuous, and I felt uneasy, for I knew we'd have to fudge the ritual, and I didn't know what the men knew. They're fudging their very ritual. The old priest was a... Did you get what it said earlier, by the way, about they're not allowed to start a lodge without having a warrant from another lodge and being officers in that lodge, and they're fudging it. They're not officers. That's right. Jerry says, Liberté, égalité, fraternité. Now we chop off your head. Shouts out to Jerry out there for holding it down. Appreciate you, homeboy. Shouts out to everybody out there. Thank you for joining me. Appreciate y'all joining me on this vooding day. We're going to read some Kipling. The minute Dravet puts on the master's apron that the girls had made for him, the priest fetches a whoop and a howl and runs to overturn the stone that Dravet was sitting on. It's all up now, it says. That comes to meddling with the croft without warrant. Dravet never winked an eye, not when 10 priests took and tilted over the Grand Master's chair, which was to say the stone of Imbra. The priest begins rubbing the bottom end of it to clear away the black dirt, and presently he shows all the other priests the master's mark, same as was on Dravet's apron, cut into the stone, which is the square and compass with the all-seeing eye. Not even the priest of the Temple of Imbra knew it was there. The old chap falls flat on his face at Dravet's feet and kisses him. By virtue of the authority vested in me by my own right hand and the help of Peachy, I declare myself Grand Master of all Freemasonry in Kafiristan, in this the mother lodge of the country, and King of Kafiristan equally with Peachy, although he's the only one crowned. Let's see. I know you won't cheat me because you're sons of Alexander and not like these common people. You are my people. By God, says he, running off into English at the end, I'll make a damn fine nation, capital N, of you, or I'll die in the making. He learned the lingo the way I never could. They form a war council, of which Peachy is head of the war council, but then later he's demoted. That's part of their breaking of friendship. I won't make a nation, says he. I'll make an empire, Dravet says on page 45. These men aren't, I can't say the word that's mentioned there, they're English. Look at their eyes. Look at their mouths. Look at the way they stand up. They sit on chairs in their own houses. They're the lost tribes. Basically saying they're the lost tribe. Or something like it, and they've grown to be English. I take a census in the spring. If the priests don't get frightened, there must be a fair 2 million of them in these hills. But then as they continuously say throughout, there must be 2 million of them in these hills, but they also say there be devils. There be devils or gods in these hills, and then it turns out they are the devils or gods, meddling with the other demon worshiping devils and gods, and then they find out they're all just common men, and they are frauds. I'll treat, he says, 250,000 men ready to cut in on Russia's right flank when she tries for India. Peachy, man, we shall be emperors of the earth. Raja Brooke will be shuckling to us. I'll treat with the viceroy on equal terms. The viceroy is a reference to the viceroy of India, Curzon, Lord Curzon. The book I'm going to get to in a second will mention Kitchener and Khartoum and how Rudyard Kipling saw in the proverbial tea leaves, I guess, the fall of the empire because of the fall of Khartoum. And he saw that in the building of the at the Great Exhibition and the Twin Pillars. We'll get to that in a sec. He says, let's see. A viceroy shall do it for me. Page 46. I'll send a man through in the spring for those men, and I'll write for a dispensation from the Grand Lodge for what I've done as Grand Master. When everything was shipshape, I'd hand over the crown, this crown I'm wearing now, to Queen Victoria on my knees, and she'd say, "Rise up, Sir Daniel Dravet." You know, the king now, Charles, I mean, the crown jewels, they remark in the film that their treasure hoard makes the crown jewels look like, you know, look like the East End or something like that. Look like costume jewelry. But remember that the crown jewels, if you've ever been to London, you go to the Tower of London, you can see the crown jewels. The centerpiece in the Queen's crown is the what's it called? The Kapori Nuit, or is that Crowley? I forget the name of it, but that might be Crowley's daughter's name. I'm confusing the two, but it's the crown jewel, and it's a ruby. Is it a ruby or a sapphire? Now I'm mixing the story up. But anyway, it's from India. It's the Queen's. It's the jewel of India that they found when they took over India, and then they sent it back to London, and then it was put in Queen Victoria's crown. It's still there. Toledo, shouts out to Toledo out there in New Zealand. Random question, but have you seen... Hold on, let me go back. Random question, but have you seen the... Hold on. Have you seen the Mighty Boosh? And what did you think of it? Great UK alternative show. Is the Mighty Boosh the one with Bo Selecta? Bo Selecta. I can't remember if that's the right one. But shouts out to Toledo for dropping that 5 New Zealand bucks. Thank you so much, Toledo. Appreciate you and all your support. Always. Shouts out to everybody out there. Don't forget, if you want to support me, you can hit that super chat button. Really appreciate it. I need the support, you guys. We all do, but I really need the support. I could use your support, so thank you so much. I need to buy a whole new section of books, a stack of books. So thank you to everybody out there, always supporting me so generously. I love you guys so much. Let's see. Page 46. It isn't that, said Daniel, putting his hand very hard on my shoulder, Masonic sign. And I don't wish to say anything that's against you, for no other living man would have followed me and made me what I am as you have done. You're a first-class commander-in-chief, and the people know you, but it's a big country, and somehow you can't help me, Peachy, in the way I want to be helped. Go to your blasted priests, then, says I, and I was very sorry when I made that remark, but it did hurt me sore to find Daniel talking so superior when I drilled all the men and done all he told me. Mortal Cain. Don't let's quarrel, Peachy, says Daniel without cursing. I can't do Sean Connery. You're a king, you're a king too, he says, and half the kingdom is yours. But can't you see, Peachy, we want cleverer men than us now, 3 or 4 of them that we can scatter about for our deputies. It's a hugest great state, and I can't always tell the right thing to do, and I haven't time for all I want to do. And here's the winter coming on and all. He put half his beard into his mouth, and it was as red as the gold of his crown. I'm going to eat his words and eat his crown. Page 48, we was kings, y'all. We was kings. We was motherfucking kings. It says... The contract only lasted till such a time as we was kings. And kings we have been these months past. Go get you a wife too, Peachy. A nice strapping plump girl that'll keep you warm in the winter. That's prettier than English girls. And we can take the pick of them, boil them once or twice in hot water, and they'll come out as fair as chicken and ham. Okay. Don't tempt me, I says. I will not have any dealings with a woman until we are a damn side more settled than we are now. And then he says, no, I mean a wife. I want to take a wife. For the last time asking, Dan, do not, I says. It'll only bring us harm. The Bible says that kings ain't to waste their strength on women, especially when they got a new raw kingdom to work over. And then on the bottom of page 49, haven't I put the shadow of my hand over this country? You remember that old, one of those political cartoons of Cecil Rhodes with the shadow of the hand of the empire going over Africa? Who stopped this last Afghan raid? It was me, really, but Dravitt was too angry to remember. Who bought your guns? Who repaired the bridges? Who's the grand master of the sign cut in the stone? And he thumped his hand on the block that he used to sit on in the lodge and at the council, which opened the lodge anyways. Billy Fish said nothing, and no more did the others. Keep your hair on, Dan. Ask the girls. That's how it's done at home, and these people are quite English. The marriage of king is a matter of state, says Dan in a white-hot rage, for he could feel, I hope, that he was going against his better mind. Billy Fish, says I, to the chief of Bashkai. What's the difficulty here? A straight answer to a true friend. You know, says Billy Fish. How should a man tell you who know everything? How can daughters of men marry gods or devils? It's not proper. Should have listened to Billy Fish. I remembered something like that in the Bible, but if after seeing us as long as they had, they still believed we were gods, it wasn't for me to undeceive them. There's his hubris. They think of him as a god, so he's going to play the role. This is like, this is almost Kurtzian, right? Like in Apocalypse Now. There are all sorts of gods and devils in these mountains, and now and again a girl marries one of them and isn't seen anymore. Besides, you two know the mark cut in the stone. Only the gods know that. We thought you were men till you showed the sign of the master. I wish then that we had explained about the loss of the genuine secrets of a master mason at the first go-off, but I said nothing. And then they surround him, and they say, not a god nor a devil, but only a man. My own notion is that Dan began to go mad in his head from that hour. He stared up and down like a stuck pig on page 55. Then he was all for walking back alone and killing the priest with his bare hands. An emperor am I, says Daniel, and next year I shall be a knight of the queen. And Martin O'Kane says, you damned engine-driving, plate-laying missionary's pass-hunting hound. He sat upon a rock and called me every foul name he could lay tongue to. That's the Miltonian imagery, right? Satan sitting on the adamantine rock, on the rock in his adamantine chains, cursing. And then next morning, they're in a cruel, bad country. And all the people that they've trained to be proper Englishmen with their rifles then turn against them, right? They get surrounded. And the king lost his head. Damn your eyes, man, he says. But do you know, on page 60, you know what they did to Peachy between two pine trees? Two pine trees between the twin pillars, right? They crucified him, sir, as Peachy's hands will show. Peachy speaks about himself in the third person here because it's like he's another person. He's gone through this quest, and now he's come back a different man. He's living in the shell of his body, right? They used wooden pegs for his hands and his feet, and he didn't die. And he hung there and screamed, and they took him down the next day, and they said it was a miracle that he wasn't dead. They took him down, poor old Peachy, that hadn't done them any harm, that hadn't done them any. He rocked to and fro and wept bitterly, wiping his eyes with the back of his scarred hands and moaning like a child for some 10 minutes. They was cruel enough to feed me up in the temple because they said he was more of a god than old Daniel was a man. The mountains they danced at night, and the mountains they tried to fall on Peachy's head. He never let go of Dan's hand, and he never let go of Dan's head. They gave it to him as a present in the temple to remind him not to come again. And though the crown was pure gold and Peachy was starving, never would Peachy sell the same. You know, Dravit, sir. You knew right worshipful brother Dravit. Look at him now. And then he shows him the head. And he said, the dried, withered head of Daniel Dravit. The morning sun had long been paling, the lamp struck the red beard, and blind sunken eyes struck to a heavy circlet of gold studded with raw turquoises that Carnahan placed tenderly on the battered temples. You behold now the emperor in his habit as he lived, the king of Kafiristan with his crown upon his head. Poor old Daniel that was a monarch once. And then it ends with a hymn. And he's driven off to the nearest mission area for eventual transfer to the asylum. And then it says he was admitted suffering from sunstroke. He died early yesterday morning, was a half hour bareheaded in the sun at midday. Yes, but do you happen to know if he had anything upon him by chance when he died? Not to my knowledge. And there the matter rests. So that's the book. A couple of things. Let's see, in these essays, I covered that Kipling was the youngest Nobel Prize recipient in 1907. They tried to get him to be poet laureate, but he declined. This says, but in a failure to understand the importance of the ruse behind the ritual, Dravit sought to establish a dynasty by exploiting yet one more ritual of power, that of intermarriage with the local population. When Dravit's flesh is ripped by the bite of the woman whom he is intent on marrying, the obscuring veil of power is ripped aside. They pierce the veil. And they are exposed as mere men. This essay is on the Freemasonic parable aspects of the film and the book. And it says, let's see. It talks about how they tried to get, John Huston had tried to make this movie for years and tried to get Humphrey Bogart and Clark Gable, also Masons, to be in it, but Bogey died, and then Clark Gable died. Then they tried to get it with two other, I forget who the other actors were, maybe Robert Redford, I can't remember. But then they got these two, and these two are perfect for this movie. And it says, they are lovable rogues who aim for the stars and end up in the dust. They called us heroes then, but times are different now, says Carnan. It's the bureaucrats what done it. Resentful but plucky and tired of surviving on scams, they decide to set out for the mythical land of Kafiristan and use their soldiering talents to become kings in their own right, plunder their new subjects 4 ways to Sunday, and retire as English gentlemen. For a time, they succeed beyond their wildest dreams until overreaching greed and hubris bring them down. Billy Fish is Gunga Din, only smarter and without the patronizing aftertaste. It's easy to read The Man Who Would Be King as a wickedly satirical metaphor for the rise and fall of the British Empire in particular and colonialism in general. But that is hardly the end of the story. The first line of Kipling's short story is not only one of the most oft-quoted lines in modern Western literature, but it's also a nearly perfect one-sentence summary of the philosophical heart of Freemasonry in terms of the brother to a prince and fellow to a beggar if he be worthy, this essay says. Let's see. Masonic legend traces its roots further back than the Knights Templars through ancient Greece to the building of King Solomon's Temple. Indeed, at the heart of Dravit and Carnan's downfall are a number of violations of the fundamental precepts of Masonry, which we just talked about in there, except for it doesn't matter because they're still trying to, Bogey was, exactly, Jerry. You guys seen The African Queen with Bogey? That's the Bogey movie I like the most. Let's see. And the one-eyed statue of Ember that peers sternly down on our heroes' fall from grace can easily be read as the all-seeing eye of Masonry, but it's the all-seeing eye of this demon, right? Dravit's breaking out of it, that's what the pyramid is, right? Dravit's breaking of his vow to Peachy, a fellow Mason, and his lusting after the star and garter, the badge of a Mason, being considered to be the highest honor a Mason can ever receive. Also, both violations of Masonic tradition and values. Some of the roguish pair's most admirable traits hark back to the craft. Okay, whatever. Peachy's easy and wholehearted forgiveness of Dravit's fatal hubris as they are about to die is a simple and eloquent expression of what this guy says is Masonry. It's written by Mason. But doesn't he get what happens? Doesn't he get what happens in the end? Right? Or their ruse, the con man aspect of this. A couple of things from this book. This is a great book right here. It's called The Decline and Fall of the British Empire, 1781 to 1997. It goes through the handover in Hong Kong. This is a great book. It's published in this was published in 2010. I think originally 2007. I read it back in 2010. So a couple of words on Afghanistan and on Rudyard Kipling. This says in the chapter, to stop is dangerous, to recede ruin, which is exactly what they were just talking about in the text, right? They were like, Dravit was like, no, we got to keep going because then we'll fall into ruin if we don't. But they keep going into ruin. They're walking into their ruin in the first place. Defense invariably meant attack. By a curious paradox, the first half of Queen Victoria's reign, the nadir of enthusiasm for colonies and dependencies, saw that one of her subjects called the greatest advances in conquest since the days of Julius Caesar. During this period, the British Empire grew on average by 100,000 square miles a year. Almost the same rate of expansion as that in the late 19th century, usually reckoned the golden age of territorial aggrandizement. True, the forward policy was by no means consistent. Britain's empire was won as it would be lost in a haphazard, piecemeal fashion. 100,000 square miles a year. The largest empire. Prester John is mentioned on page 166, which plays into the mountaintop kingdom aspect of this sort of Templar roots of Freemasonry in the book. Even though the provenance is stated as going back to Alexandria, which precedes the Templars, obviously. Was that 300 BC? In fact, this says, it's talking about one of the kings in Africa. He had he had signed the land of Ophir and the kingdom of Prester John to the realm of fable. In fact, the most eager participant in the scramble for Africa was King Leopold of the Belgians. The Congo Free State, which was named grotesquely, a vampire growth intended to suck the country dry, and it was, of course, the setting for Heart of Darkness. Britain enjoyed a paramount position in Africa thanks to the Royal Navy and sometimes responded to challenges first from Boers in the south. Gladstone's government annexed Basuto land in 1868. Disraeli prosecuted a similar imperial policy, being equally reluctant to accumulate costly encumbrances, especially in the tropics. I can't read over trying to read my notes here. And also remember that Kipling's first cousin was Stanley Baldwin. Did you know that? Kipling's first cousin was Stanley Baldwin, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, through his mother. Let's see. In 1 year, Britain took Malaya, Fiji, the Transvaal, and Cyprus. Going on to Kipling here. This says, this is about the exhibition, the Great Exhibition. It says on page 338 of this book, the Twin Towers, which scarcely survived the British Empire, were a Mughal excrescence on a Roman base, and they typified the eclecticism of Wembley's architecture. Canada and Australia favored the neoclassical. South Africa built a traditional Dutch mansion. India amalgamated its largest mosque and its finest tomb, the Taj Mahal, to create an alabaster palace. West Africa raised a 3-acre red-walled city encompassing a terracotta fort. This was at the exhibition in London. Burma constructed an old pagoda in Ceylon on a Kandyan temple. The Palace of Beauty was a melange of cream stone, sienna marble, and lapis lazuli. Laid out amid lakes and gardens connected by the never-stop railway and illuminated after dark by 3 million lights, these edifices were an imperial treasure casket. They contained gold, diamond, and coal mines, furs, forests, and fisheries, coffee, tea, sugar, and rubber plantations, timber mills, ostrich farms, sheep stations, rice paddies, cotton fields, palm groves, oil wells, chocolate factories. Craftsmen from India to the West Indies wove cloth, worked leather, and beat metal. Hong Kong offered a picturesque street of shops. India provided a replica of Tutankhamun's tomb, complete with dragomans. Bermuda showed Old Glory being hoisted when America took over part of the dockyard during the war. And then also, guess what? The streets were named by Kipling. This is in the Great Exhibition. It says, however, as the Times further observes, since the crown was the sole bond of empire, the weakness and dangers of the system are manifest. So despite the pomp and circumstance, which one critic found vulgar, the exhibition bore involuntary witness to the frailty of the system. Plagued by labor troubles, it was not completed on time, and stucco facades concealed a litter of tangled wires, twisted pipes, and broken packing cases. It attracted 27 million visitors but lost 600,000 pounds. It proved too expensive for many workers, though the hard-pressed waitresses in its cafes and restaurants were woefully underpaid. Its 50-acre amusement park seemed to be a Roman circus where the populace could seek a refuge from reality. It was the Achilles heel of British capitalism, and they virtually ignored it. The closing speech was by the Duke of York, the future King George VI, and it was a stammering embarrassment. All told, the exhibition scarcely restored confidence in the British Empire's capacity to develop, and in the wake of the war, to undertake the biggest rebuilding job our planet has ever seen. Let's see. I wrote, the gigantic enterprise of empire is a mystery. Britain ruled 43 million people in 2 million square miles. The square was Masonic of its dozens. This is just in its dozen African colonies. 40 Englishmen ruled Sarawak. It was what they called the thin white line. Britain augmented their power by collaborating with local elites. And this is typified in the George Orwell story, Shooting an Elephant, which is a tough one to read. But basically what happens in that short story is Orwell, who was a policeman in where was he, in Singapore? But in the story takes place, and he's in India, and an elephant gets loose and tramples a bunch of people, and the elephant then gets under control, but he has to shoot the elephant in order to save face with the locals. And that plays into what I just read about them, the English only having 40 people in control of the Sarawak region. I mean, it's a thin line. This talks about, on page 141, Englishmen like posing as gods, which plays into the text that into The Man Who Would Be King, because they say, that quote that Dravit says about, they say, "Are you gods?" And he says, "No, we're second best thing. We're Englishmen." Those who ran the empire between the wars were at least brought up to command. Half of them, those most likely to succeed, came from public schools, meaning the English public school system, the prep schools, which prided themselves on turning out leaders of the future. By now, the cult of athleticism was entrenched, and games had definitively superseded godliness and good learning as the prime means for the training of character. Of course, the colonial service also accommodated savants and classical scholars who felt dreadfully Rome sick, but it was qualities of character that chiefly recommended candidates to the ineffable Sir Ralph First. Kipling's dad was kind of one of these guys. He was like an art history professor in India. Let's see. This says, on the other hand, despite much local partisanship, their first duty was not to the inhabitants of the colonies, but to the empire. As an acting governor of Nigeria told the young James Callahan, it would help him and his colleagues if Britain ceased its hypocritical emphasis on being in Africa for the benefit of Africans and acknowledged that we stayed there for our own good, though this might also profit the natives who would otherwise revert to cannibalism in a disease-ridden malarial swamp and jungle. Furthermore, officials often had the vices of their virtues. Many were priggish, boorish, aloof, and stultifyingly conventional. Leonard Woolf said that those in Ceylon never rose above the level of the lowest Cambridge pseudo-blood, and that no one talked about anything more interesting than the service. Europeans seldom carried cash in the East. One viceroy of India, Lord Linlithgow, confessed to never having seen a rupee. And then finally, let's see. Another Kipling reference on page 369. This says, yet one influential visitor, Rudyard Kipling, discerned the doom of the empire and the progress of the city in Khartoum, which is taken and run by Kitchener. Furnished with an education and easy life, its people would soon demand Sudan for the Sudanese, he declared. It is a hard law, but an old one. Rome died learning it, as our Western civilization may die, that if you give any man anything that he has not painfully earned for himself, you infallibly make him or his descendants your devoted enemies. This was the characteristically crusty view of a writer who, in his frequent identification of British and Roman imperial decline, once acknowledged that Gibbon was the fat heifer I plowed with. In the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. So that is about it for The Man Who Would Be King. Hopefully that was, edifying or whatever. Hopefully that was good, you guys. Hopefully we had a good time there. And stay tuned because, of course, we have our homeboy, David Patrick Harry, Church of the Eternal Logos, who is going to be streaming, I think, at 5 o'clock Eastern Time. And then, of course, also our good friends out there, Jay and JD and beautiful, wonderful Tristan Haggard, Primal Edge Health, are streaming, and they will be talking about the handlers and the celebs, right? Shouts out to Maddie out there, Digital Minefield, who just had me. He had me and Jerry at Exposing Powerful Lies, our homeboy Jerry, Exposing Powerful Lies, and Rachel, based homeschool mom, on there the other night, and we were talking about handlers and all that. And then, of course, the stuff happened over the weekend with Backstreet's Back. All right. So, and of course, Space Homeschool Mom, Rachel, and Jamie have covered this stuff extensively. Jamie's written a few books on it. On all the celebrity stuff that's going on. So that will be interesting to hear them. The next book that we'll be doing, I think, will be Don DeLeo's Libra. And So we're going from Victorian, late Victorian, almost Edwardian literature back into postmodern literature, and they're talking about the big JFK event thing that happened through the eyes of he Larvey Oswald. And I think that's about it. Should I check super chats? Let me see if we got anything in super chats here before we go. Thank you all for being here, and thanks for all your support as always. Let's see. Shouts out to all our homies out there. And shouts out again to Toledo for asking that question. That was a great question. Thank you so much for your continuous support, Toledo. You're awesome. Thank you to our homeboy DJ Day Gyre out there in Ozland, who sends $7.99 Ozbucks. Really with no comment. Really appreciate you. Shouts out again to Valentine in that last stream for that $5 donation. And let me see if I can finally read what Valentine wrote there. That was, I'm not bragging, folks, but Bayes Lit is the most Bayes analyzer out there. He's got the documents. So thank you. I couldn't read it last time. It wouldn't let me read it. The whole thing, it cut it off. So thank you so much for that. And yes, Bo Selecta, Toledo. Thank you so much. And I'm going to check one more thing. He Larvey Oswald. I'm going to check one more thing here. Let's see. Oh, shouts out to Devin. Thank you so much. Our almond brother out there who sends cheers. $10 donation. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you out there, homeboy. Thank you. Let's see. Oh, shouts out to Brian out there who sends $10. Would be amazing to see you do The Dead by Joyce, which I think John Huston also made a movie of. Great stream yet again, brother. Yes, and that film has his daughter, Angelica Huston, in it. And I've actually got a copy of Dubliners in there. Is it in Dubliners? I think it's part of Dubliners. Yeah. So I need to reread that. So, yeah, that'd be one that I could consider. I'm going to put in there. So thank you so much for that. And wow, it shouts out to Victoria for that for that 33 Illuminate confirmed $1 donation on PayPal. Thank you so much, Victoria. Really appreciate you. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks to Kristen. Thanks to Kristen. Slowboy Whiteboard, Crunchy Jackson. Shouts out to Crispy. Shouts out to all our homies out there. Thank you so much, y'all. I really appreciate you. And I will see you all at DPH at Coteasy, and then again at Primal Edge Health at Tristan Haggard with JD tonight. So that'll be fun. All right, y'all. That's about all I got. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Peace.